I'm Sophia, 21 years old and trying to survive my junior year at NYU. My relationship with my older sister Isabel has been broken for years, fractured by a childhood where she was the golden child and I was the afterthought. Now she's getting married, and my dad just called with an ultimatum: attend her wedding or kiss my tuition goodbye. The thought of watching my sister's perfect day makes me physically ill, but so does the idea of dropping out with only 3 semesters left. If you've ever been forced to smile through an event that was tearing you apart inside, you might understand. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if family drama resonates with you. To understand why I'd rather walk barefoot over broken glass than attend my sister's wedding, you need to know about our family. My dad, James, built a successful marketing firm from nothing. My mom was the warm heart of our family until cancer took her when I was 12. And then there's Isabel, my sister who's 5 years older and has always been the center of my dad's universe. The favoritism started early. I have this vivid memory from when I was 7 and Isabel was 12. I'd won first place in my school's science fair with a project on plant growth that I'd worked on for weeks. When I came home clutching my blue ribbon, Dad barely glanced up from his newspaper. "That's nice, honey," he said, then immediately asked Isabel about her soccer practice. That same month, when Isabel's team came in 3rd place in a local tournament, Dad took the entire family out to an expensive restaurant and presented her with a brand new bike. I still remember standing in the restaurant parking lot, watching her circle around on her shiny new bike while my science ribbon sat forgotten on the kitchen counter at home. Our family vacations were always planned around Isabel's schedule and preferences. If she wanted to go to the beach, we went to the beach, even though I got terrible sunburns and preferred the mountains. If a trip conflicted with one of her social events, the trip would be rescheduled, no matter what plans I had to cancel. Christmas and birthdays followed the same pattern. Isabel would receive expensive electronics, designer clothes, and once even a car for her 16th birthday. I got practical items, school supplies, clothes from department stores, and educational books. One Christmas, when I was 14, I received a scientific calculator while Isabel got a MacBook Pro. When I couldn't hide my disappointment, Dad said, "The calculator is what you need for school, Sophia. Be grateful for what you get." Mom was my buffer, my protector. She'd make special time just for me, taking me to museums or bookstores on Saturday mornings while Dad took Isabel shopping or to sports events. Mom would display my artwork and certificates prominently on the refrigerator and talk about my achievements during dinner. She'd whisper to me, "You shine in your own special way, Sophia. Never forget that." When Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, our family shifted entirely. During her 2-year battle, Dad relied heavily on Isabel, who was 17 when Mom first got sick, to help with household tasks and emotional support. I was only 10 when it started, deemed too young to handle the reality of what was happening. They'd have hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room, leaving me feeling even more excluded. After Mom died, the dynamic worsened dramatically. Dad became emotionally distant from me, as if looking at me reminded him too much of Mom. People always said I had her eyes and gentle manner. Isabel, meanwhile, stepped fully into the role of the lady of the house, making decisions about meals and decor, and criticizing my choices in everything from clothes to friends. "Mom would want you to dress more appropriately," she'd say, though her own clothes were often far more revealing than mine. Or, "Don't you think you spend too much time reading? It's not healthy to be so antisocial." Dad never contradicted her, and often reinforced her comments with his own. With Mom gone, I poured myself into academics. School became my sanctuary, a place where achievement was recognized and hard work rewarded. My teachers praised my writing abilities and analytical thinking. My 10th grade English teacher, Ms. Patterson, even told me she kept my essays to show future students what excellent work looked like. But when I shared this with Dad over dinner, he nodded absently and immediately turned to ask Isabel about her college applications. The worst example of the favoritism came during my high school graduation. I was valedictorian of my class, with a full scholarship offered to several prestigious universities. The day before the ceremony, Isabel, who was working at a marketing firm in Seattle, not Dad's company, as she'd insisted on making it on her own, though Dad had called in numerous favors to get her the position, received a promotion to junior account executive. The morning of my graduation, Dad announced we'd be having a special family dinner that night. I assumed it was to celebrate my achievement. I spent the entire ceremony scanning the audience, finally spotting Dad in the back row, on his phone for most of the event. He didn't even come forward for the traditional parent-graduate photos. At dinner that night, Dad ordered champagne and raised his glass. My heart lifted, thinking finally, he was going to acknowledge my hard work. To Isabel, he said, beaming. The youngest junior account executive in her firm's history. I always knew you were destined for greatness. Isabel soaked up the praise while I sat there, still in my graduation cap and gown, fighting back tears. No one mentioned my valedictory speech or my scholarships. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating something special, Isabel quickly answered, my promotion, without a single reference to my graduation. That night, I made my decision. I would accept the scholarship to NYU, the furthest school from Seattle that had accepted me. I needed distance, space to breathe, room to discover who I was outside of Isabel's shadow. When I announced my choice, Dad frowned. NYU? That's across the country. Wouldn't you prefer to stay closer to home? University of Washington is an excellent school. What he meant was, wouldn't you prefer to stay where I can compare you to Isabel daily? I need this, Dad, I said firmly. I need to go somewhere new. He agreed to cover what the scholarship didn't, though not without pointing out repeatedly what a financial sacrifice it was. Isabel rolled her eyes and said, you always have to be so dramatic, don't you? Moving all the way across the country just to make a point. But it wasn't about making a point. It was about survival. Arriving in New York was like taking my first real breath. The city was overwhelming, chaotic, and absolutely perfect. Here, nobody knew me as Isabel's little sister or the quiet one. I could define myself on my own terms. I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn to share with two other students, Maya, a film major from California with vibrant blue hair and more confidence than anyone I'd ever met, and Josh, a dance student who practiced at all hours but was considerate enough to use headphones when choreographing at 2 a.m. Our apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up with questionable plumbing and a persistent draft in winter, but it was mine in a way no space had ever been before. To supplement my scholarship and the funds Dad reluctantly transferred each semester, I got a job at a coffee shop near campus. The hours were brutal when combined with my course load, but I managed to maintain a 3.9 GPA in my psychology program. I was determined to become a therapist, to help others who felt unseen and unheard as I had for so many years. Maya quickly became the friend I'd never had in Seattle. She saw me, really saw me, and celebrated my victories, no matter how small. You aced that insane developmental psych midterm while working 30 hours this week? We're going out tonight, my treat, she'd insist, dragging me to a tiny jazz club or hidden restaurant she'd discovered. During my sophomore year, Maya convinced me to start therapy myself. You can't pour from an empty cup, she'd said. How can you help others process their trauma if you haven't addressed your own? She was right, of course. I found a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, Dr. Larson, who helped me understand that what I'd experienced was emotional neglect and that the constant comparison to Isabel had created deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. Slowly, I began to recognize my own worth, separate from academic achievement or anyone else's approval. My contact with family dwindled to obligatory calls on major holidays and Dad's birthday. The conversations were always the same, brief inquiries about my classes, followed by lengthy updates about Isabel's latest accomplishments. I learned to mute the phone and focus on something else during these monologues, making appropriate noises of interest when required. I hadn't spoken directly to Isabel in nearly 3 years. The last time was Christmas break of my freshman year, when I'd flown home for what I thought would be a fresh start. Instead, I endured 2 weeks of Isabel belittling my choice of major, psychology. So you're paying all that money to learn how to ask, how does that make you feel, and Dad's constant comparisons. I left 3 days earlier than planned and spent the next Christmas in New York with Maya's family, who welcomed me warmly into their traditions. By my junior year, I'd built a life I was proud of. I'd been selected as a research assistant for Dr. Mitchell, one of the most renowned developmental psychologists in the country. Only 2 students from the entire department were chosen for these positions each year, and the experience would significantly strengthen my graduate school applications. I'd also started volunteering at a crisis text line, putting my developing skills to use helping others through difficult moments. I remember sitting in my tiny bedroom, surrounded by psychology journals and the twinkle lights Maya had insisted on hanging to combat academic dreariness, feeling genuinely content. I was making my own path, healing from the past, and looking toward a future defined by my own choices and values. That's when the envelope arrived. It was thick, cream-colored, with elaborate calligraphy spelling out my name and address. Even before opening it, I knew what it was. The return address confirmed my suspicion: my father's house in Seattle. A wedding invitation. The invitation was exactly what I'd expect from Isabel: extravagant, ostentatious, and designed to impress. Thick cardstock with gold foil accents announced her upcoming nuptials to Tyler Wellington, taking place at Cascade Mountain Resort, one of the most exclusive wedding venues in the Pacific Northwest. The invitation included details about the 4-day celebration, including a welcome dinner, spa day for the bridal party, golf outing, rehearsal dinner, and finally, the ceremony and reception. I'd never even heard of Tyler Wellington before. A quick social media search revealed he was the 30-year-old founder of a successful tech startup, recently featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. Their engagement photos showed a tall, conventionally handsome man with a perfect smile and Isabel gazing adoringly at him against various scenic backdrops. According to the invitation, they'd hired Vivian Carter, a celebrity wedding planner whose work regularly appeared in high-end bridal magazines. The whole affair screamed money, status, and Isabel's perpetual need to be the center of attention. My immediate reaction was a firm no. I sat at our kitchen table, carefully composed a polite refusal on the RSVP card, citing academic commitments, and dropped it in the mail the next morning. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as the envelope slid into the mailbox. Case closed. 3 days later, my phone rang with my father's number. "What do you mean you're not coming to your sister's wedding?" he demanded, skipping any greeting. "Hello to you too, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have finals that week and can't miss them." "Finals? The wedding is in June. School will be over." He was right, and I hadn't checked the dates carefully enough before crafting my excuse. Rookie mistake. "I have my research position with Dr. Mitchell, and I can't take time off so soon after starting," I tried again. "This is your sister's wedding, Sophia," he said, his voice taking on the dangerous quiet tone that had always preceded his most devastating disappointments in me. "Your only sister. Family comes first." I almost laughed at that. Family comes first? Since when? Dad, Isabel and I haven't spoken in 3 years. I doubt she even wants me there. Of course she wants you there. She specifically asked me to make sure you attend. That I didn't believe for a second. Isabel had never sought my company, only my subjugation. "I'm sorry, but I've already made my decision. Please give Isabel my congratulations." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Let me remind you, Sophia, that I pay your tuition. I pay for that apartment you live in. I make your life in New York possible." My stomach dropped. He'd never explicitly threatened to cut me off before, though the possibility had always lingered in the background of our relationship. "Are you saying you'll stop supporting me if I don't attend this wedding?" "I'm saying that if you can't be bothered to support your family for one weekend, I don't see why I should continue supporting you financially. Actions have consequences." The call ended shortly after, with me promising to think about it and him reminding me that the RSVP deadline was approaching. I sat on my bed, phone clutched in my trembling hand, as panic rose in my chest. I couldn't afford NYU on my own. My scholarship covered about 60%, but the remaining costs, plus living expenses in one of the world's most expensive cities, were well beyond what I could earn at the coffee shop. Student loans were an option, but taking them on mid-degree would still leave me with a significant shortfall for the upcoming semester. Maya found me an hour later, still sitting in the same position, tears streaming down my face. "Whoa, what happened?" she asked, immediately sitting beside me and wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I explained the situation through hiccuping sobs. "Your family is toxic," Maya declared when I finished. "Your dad is literally trying to buy your compliance, and your sister is allowing it. That's emotional blackmail." "I know," I whispered. "But what choice do I have? I can't afford to finish school without his help." Maya suggested asking Dr. Larson for advice, which I did during our emergency session the next day. My therapist's normally calm expression tightened as I recounted the conversation with my father. "This is a difficult position," she acknowledged. "While I believe maintaining your boundaries with your family is important for your mental health, the reality of your financial situation creates significant constraints on your choices." In the end, I made the only decision I could. I called my father back and agreed to attend the wedding, though I made it clear I would only be present for the main event, not the 4-day extravaganza. He wasn't happy but accepted the compromise. The conversation was brief, no expression of gratitude for my concession, only a curt, "I'll let Isabel know." As I hung up, I felt a familiar sense of defeat. Once again, my needs and feelings were secondary to keeping up appearances in the Mason family drama. Once again, Isabel would get exactly what she wanted. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of anxiety and preparation. I needed something to wear that would be appropriate for a luxury resort wedding without breaking my limited budget. After hours of scouring thrift stores and sale racks, I found a simple navy blue dress at a consignment shop that looked far more expensive than it was. Maya helped me style it with accessories borrowed from her film department's costume closet, assuring me I looked elegantly understated. Getting time off from the coffee shop was another hurdle. I'd only been there 6 months and had limited vacation days, but my manager, Tanya, took pity on me after hearing a sanitized version of the situation. "Family stuff is complicated," she said, adjusting the schedule. "Take the days you need." The cheapest flight I could find still cost more than I could comfortably afford, but I put it on my nearly maxed-out credit card, wincing at the thought of the interest that would accrue. Dr. Mitchell was understanding about my brief absence from the research project, though I promised to make up the hours upon my return. My final therapy session before the trip was intensely focused on coping strategies. "Remember your grounding techniques when you feel overwhelmed," Dr. Larson reminded me. "And it's okay to step away if a situation becomes too much. Taking a 5-minute bathroom break to breathe and center yourself isn't rude, it's self-care." We practiced several breathing exercises and worked through potential scenarios that might arise during the wedding. For each difficult interaction I anticipated, we developed a mental script and response plan. "You've grown so much in the time we've worked together," Dr. Larson said as our session ended. "Trust your instincts and remember that you cannot control their behavior, only your response to it." The day of my flight arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. Maya accompanied me to the airport, armed with coffee and unwavering support. "Text me updates," she insisted, hugging me tightly at the security checkpoint. "I'll be your remote backup. Anytime you need to vent or cry or just be reminded that you're amazing, I'm a message away." The flight from JFK to Seattle was turbulent, both literally and emotionally. Halfway through, the rising panic I'd been suppressing finally erupted. My heart raced, my palms sweated, and breathing became difficult. The woman in the seat next to me, a grandmother returning from visiting her daughter in New York, noticed my distress. "First time flying?" she asked kindly. "No," I managed to say between controlled breaths. "First time going home in a long time." She nodded knowingly. "Ah, that's often more turbulent than any flight. Would you like a mint?" Sometimes having something to focus on helps. I accepted the candy and focused on the strong peppermint flavor, slowly bringing my breathing back under control. I texted Maya about the incident once I'd calmed down. "Proud of you for managing it," she replied. "Remember, you're just visiting the past, not moving back in." As the plane began its descent, I gazed out the window at the familiar landscape of the Pacific Northwest. The evergreen forests, the glimpse of mountains in the distance, the distinctive outline of the Space Needle against the skyline. It was undeniably beautiful, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the good parts of growing up here, hiking trails with Mom, the smell of rain on cedar trees, fresh seafood that couldn't be matched on the East Coast. But then the plane touched down, and reality returned. I was back in Seattle not by choice, but by coercion, to participate in a celebration for a sister who had never shown me kindness and a father who valued appearances over my well-being. My father was waiting at arrivals, looking exactly as I remembered, tall, impeccably dressed in business casual attire, his dark hair now showing significant gray at the temples. He raised a hand in greeting but didn't move to embrace me. "Sophia," he said with a nod. "Flight okay?" "Fine," I replied, following him to the short-term parking garage. The drive to our suburban home was filled with awkward silence punctuated by my father's comments about the wedding preparations. "The florist delivered the wrong shade of roses yesterday. Your sister was beside herself until they promised a replacement delivery tomorrow morning. Tyler's family has reserved an entire floor of the resort. His father is a senior partner at Wellington and Gray investment firm, you know. The photographer shot Vogue spring fashion spread last year. We were lucky to get him. Not once did he ask about my life in New York, my studies, or my work. It was as if the past 3 years hadn't happened, as if I'd never left Seattle and built a life of my own." I gazed out the window, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, and texted Maya under the cover of my purse, already being ignored. "Dad only talks about the wedding." Her reply came quickly, "Of course he does. He has no original thoughts beyond what directly affects him. Stay strong. You're the most interesting person in that car by a million miles." When we pulled into the driveway of our family home, I felt a strange disconnect. The house looked smaller than I remembered, though nothing had changed externally. The same neatly trimmed lawn, the same blue shutters, the same ceramic planter by the front door that Mom had painted during her craft phase. Inside, however, things had changed. The living room had been redecorated in a modern, minimalist style that Mom would have hated. The warm colors she'd chosen were replaced by cool grays and whites. But what struck me most were the photos. Every wall featured professionally taken pictures of Isabel graduating college, Isabel at her firm's holiday party, Isabel and Tyler on various vacations and at engagement parties. I searched for any trace of myself in the family photos and found none. Even the pictures that had once included me, family vacations, holiday gatherings, had been replaced with versions that didn't feature my presence. It was as if my father had erased me from the family narrative entirely. "Your room is still upstairs," Dad said, apparently not noticing my distress at the photo wall. "Dinner's at 6. Isabel and Tyler will be joining us." He disappeared into his home office without another word, leaving me standing in a living room that documented a family history from which I'd been deliberately excluded. Dinner that evening was the first time I'd seen Isabel in 3 years. She'd always been conventionally beautiful, but now she was polished to perfection, expensively highlighted hair, subtle but flawless makeup, and a casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Tyler was tall and handsome in that generic way of men who've never been told no, with perfect white teeth and carefully styled hair. "Sophia!" Isabel exclaimed when I entered the dining room, her voice pitched high with fake enthusiasm. She air-kissed near my cheeks, careful not to actually make contact. "You finally made it. I was beginning to think you might not show up at all." "I said I would come," I replied quietly. "Well, after your initial RSVP, we weren't sure. Tyler, this is my little sister Sophia. She's at NYU. Psychology, right?" Tyler extended his hand with a friendly smile that seemed genuine enough. "Great to finally meet you." Isabel mentioned you're doing research with a professor there? Before I could answer, Isabel cut in. Oh, it's just some undergraduate thing. Nothing like the research division Tyler's company is funding at MIT. And so the evening went. Every attempt at conversation was redirected to highlight Isabel's accomplishments or Tyler's success. Dad beamed with pride throughout, refilling their wine glasses and encouraging Isabel to tell the story of how Tyler proposed, on a private yacht in the Mediterranean, with a photographer hidden on board to capture the moment. When I mentioned my research position with Dr. Mitchell, Dad frowned slightly. I'm still not convinced psychology was the right choice, Sophia. Law or business would have offered more concrete career paths. Actually, Tyler interjected, one of our company's most valuable consultants has a psychology background. She helps us understand user behavior and design more intuitive interfaces. I shot him a grateful look, but Isabel quickly changed the subject to the wedding seating arrangements. We had such a nightmare with the place cards, she sighed dramatically. Tyler's mother insisted that his great-aunt Meredith couldn't possibly be seated near his uncle Jeffrey because of some ancient family drama. After dinner, I offered to help with the dishes, but Dad waved me away. The cleaning service will handle it tomorrow. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, which had been converted into a guest room with no trace of my former presence. The ballet posters and science fair certificates were gone, replaced by generic landscape prints. My bookshelf, once overflowing with beloved novels and psychology texts, now held decorative objects and a few bestsellers that I suspected no one had actually read. Even my bed had been replaced with an anonymous queen-sized guest bed with hotel-like white linens. The rehearsal dinner the next evening was held at an upscale restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. Despite being family, I was seated at a table far from the main party, with elderly relatives and Tyler's distant cousins who had no idea who I was. From my position, I could see Isabel holding court at the head table, my father seated proudly beside her, both laughing and chatting with Tyler's parents. During the cocktail hour, I overheard two of Isabel's bridesmaids talking near the restroom. So that's the sister who abandoned the family? One asked, glancing in my direction. Yeah, apparently she just took off to New York without a backward glance. James had to beg her to come to the wedding. Isabel says she's always been difficult and attention-seeking. I ducked into a bathroom stall before they could notice me, my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. The narrative had been completely rewritten, casting me as the villain who'd abandoned a loving family, rather than a young woman escaping years of emotional neglect. When I emerged, I found Ashley, Isabel's maid of honor and childhood friend, applying lipstick at the mirror. She'd never liked me, even when we were kids, perhaps because Isabel's preferential treatment extended to her friendships as well. Oh, Sophia, she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. It must be so hard to see how close everyone is after you've been gone for so long. Isabel has become like a daughter to your dad since you left. They have dinner together every Sunday. I forced a smile. I'm glad they have each other. She even helped him through his minor heart scare last year. Did you know about that? Oh, I guess not, since you weren't around. This was the first I'd heard about any health issues with my father. The fact that no one had thought to inform me was yet another reminder of my outsider status. I managed to escape Ashley and found myself at the bar, where I met Tyler's sister, Madeline. Unlike the rest of his family, who maintained a polite but distant demeanor toward me, Madeline seemed genuinely interested in my life in New York. I lived in Brooklyn for a year after college, she told me. Best time of my life. I almost didn't come back west, but family obligations, you know? She rolled her eyes slightly, and I felt an immediate kinship. Perhaps she too understood what it meant to be the less favored sibling. Our conversation was cut short when Isabel suddenly appeared, linking her arm through mine with a grip like a vice. I need to borrow my sister for a moment, she said to Madeline with her pageant smile firmly in place. She led me to a quiet corner of the restaurant's outdoor deck, her smile dropping the instant we were alone. What are you doing? She hissed. Having a conversation with your future sister-in-law, I replied, confused. You're trying to get close to Tyler's family to make me look bad. What? No, I was just. Listen carefully, Sophia. I convinced Dad to make you come because an empty seat at the family table would raise questions we don't want to answer. But that doesn't mean you get to play the victim and try to turn Tyler's family against me. I stared at her, stunned by the accusation. I'm not playing anything. I'm just trying to get through this weekend. Right, she scoffed. Poor little Sophia, always misunderstood and mistreated. Grow up. You chose to leave, you chose to cut yourself off from the family, and now you want sympathy? I left because I was never treated like I belonged in the first place, I said quietly. And apparently, you're the one who convinced Dad to threaten my tuition if I didn't attend your wedding. Why would you even want me here if you hate me so much? Her eyes narrowed. Because appearances matter. And because Dad pays for your entire life in New York, which means you owe this family your presence when it counts. So plaster on a smile, stick to small talk with distant relatives, and know your place this weekend. You're a prop, not a participant. She strode away, leaving me shaking with a mixture of rage and hurt. I made my excuses shortly after and took a rideshare back to the house, unable to stomach another minute of the charade. In my sterile guest room, I found an old photo that had slipped behind the dresser during the room's transformation. It showed Mom and me at the Seattle Aquarium, both of us smiling widely as we watched the sea otters play. I was about 9 in the photo, and Mom was still healthy, her face full and vibrant before cancer would hollow her out. I clutched the photo to my chest and finally allowed myself to cry for everything I'd lost, my mother, my home, the possibility of a loving family relationship. And for the first time, I cried for the little girl I'd been, who had never understood why she wasn't enough. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if even the notoriously rainy Seattle weather bowed to Isabel's wishes. I woke early, the knot of dread in my stomach making further sleep impossible. From my window, I could see the catering vans already arriving, florists unloading buckets of flowers, and the wedding planner striding across the lawn with a clipboard, directing traffic like a field marshal. I checked my phone to find several messages from Maya, thinking of you today. You've got this, and remember you're just playing a role for one day. Oscar-worthy performance and then you're free. Her support bolstered me as I showered and began the process of making myself presentable. I didn't have a professional makeup artist or hairstylist like Isabel and her bridesmaids, who were getting ready at the resort, but I'd practiced enough with YouTube tutorials to create a polished look. As I was applying mascara, my phone rang with a call from my father. Sophia, we need you at the resort by 11 to be in the family photos. I thought the ceremony wasn't until 2. The photographer wants to capture the preparation moments and family portraits before guests arrive. Isabel's already there with her bridesmaids. Don't be late. He hung up before I could respond. I checked the time, 9:30 a.m. I'd need to call a rideshare since Dad had already left, apparently not considering how I would get to the venue. When I arrived at Cascade Mountain Resort, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Staff hurried through the lobby carrying arrangements of flowers and stacks of chair covers. A separate wing had been dedicated entirely to the wedding party, with signs directing guests to various preparation rooms. I followed the signs to family of the bride and found my father in a suite, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire but beaming with pride. Several of his siblings, my aunts and uncles, were also present, most of whom I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. Sophia, my Aunt Diane exclaimed. Look at you, all grown up. How's the East Coast treating you? Before I could answer, the photographer appeared, calling for the father of the bride. Dad immediately left, not even acknowledging my arrival. Aunt Diane patted my arm sympathetically. He's just nervous, she said, though we both knew that wasn't the issue. I spent the next hour being shuttled between various groupings for photos, always on the periphery, often with instructions to move a little to the left or perhaps behind Uncle Robert. In every configuration, Isabel was the focal point, radiant in her designer gown with its 10-foot train and crystal embellishments. She looked beautiful, objectively speaking, though her smile seemed to tighten whenever I entered the frame. The bridal party had their own photo session, from which I was naturally excluded. I used the time to help elderly relatives find their seats for the ceremony, a task that had apparently been assigned to no one. Tyler's mother, Linda, noticed my efforts and approached me. "You must be Sophia," she said warmly. "Tyler has mentioned you're studying psychology at NYU. That's wonderful." My mother was a therapist, and I've always had great respect for the profession. Her kindness was so unexpected that I felt tears threatening. "Thank you," I managed to say. "It's a challenging program, but I love it." "I'm sure you're very good at it. It takes a special kind of strength and empathy to help others through their struggles." Our conversation was cut short by the wedding planner announcing that all family members needed to take their positions for the ceremony. I was directed to a seat in the third row, not with the immediate family in the front. I caught Isabel smirking slightly as she noted my placement. The ceremony itself was elaborate and picture-perfect. Isabel and Tyler exchanged vows they'd written themselves, hers full of references to being completed by him, his promising to continue the legacy of love she'd always known in her family. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though the irony was painful. The worst moment came during my father's toast at the reception. He stood, champagne in hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Today is the proudest day of my life," he began. "Watching my daughter, my beautiful Isabel, marry a man worthy of her feels like the culmination of everything I've worked for as a father." He continued, describing Isabel as my only true daughter in every way that matters, and speaking at length about how she had carried on her mother's legacy of grace and compassion. I sat frozen in my seat at a table of distant relatives, each word a physical blow. Not once in his 10-minute speech did he acknowledge my existence. It was as if he truly had only one child, as the family photos in his living room suggested. During the dinner that followed, I excused myself to find the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. As I was about to enter the ladies' room, I heard my father's voice from a small alcove around the corner. He was speaking to someone, his tone relaxed in a way it never was with me. "Of course I had to get her here, Richard," he was saying to who I assumed was his business partner. "How would it look if my own daughter didn't attend her sister's wedding? People would ask questions." "But you said she didn't want to come?" the other man asked. "She didn't. Always has to make everything difficult. I had to threaten to cut off her tuition to get her to show up. Between us, I'm planning to do that anyway after this semester. She's been in New York for 3 years and hasn't once invited me to visit. Barely calls except when she needs money." Tyler's father was shocked when I told him. Said he can't imagine being so distant from his children. "Well, you've done your part. You raised one wonderful daughter, can't win them all, right?" They both chuckled, and I felt something inside me finally snap. All the careful restraint I'd practiced, all the breathing exercises and coping strategies, dissolved in a wave of pure, clarifying rage. I stepped around the corner, facing my father and the startled Richard. "Is that what you tell people?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "That I'm the ungrateful daughter who abandoned the family? That's the narrative you've created?" Dad's face flushed red. "Sophia, this isn't the time or place." "When is the time?" "When you call to remind me how much my education cost you. When you threaten to cut me off unless I perform my role in the family fiction you've created." "You're making a scene," he hissed, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. "I've never been allowed to make a scene," I continued, the words pouring out after years of silence. "I've spent my entire life being quiet, being good, trying so hard to earn a fraction of the love and attention you lavished on Isabel. Did you know I won the department award for academic excellence last semester? Or that I was selected for a research position that only goes to 2 students each year? No, because you've never asked about my life." "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? You erased me from the family photos. You seated me with second cousins at my sister's wedding. You just gave a 10-minute speech about your only true daughter. Tell me, when Mom died, did you decide I didn't matter anymore because I reminded you too much of her? Or was I never important to begin with? By now, several guests had noticed the confrontation, including Isabel, who was making her way toward us with murder in her eyes. "What are you doing?" she demanded, grabbing my arm. "This is my wedding day." "I know, Isabel. Everything has always been about you. Every day of my life has been about you." "You selfish little," she started, but was interrupted by the arrival of Tyler's mother, Linda. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "Fine," Isabel said through gritted teeth. "My sister is just having a moment. Too much champagne, I think." Linda looked between us, her gaze lingering on my face, which I knew was flushed with emotion but completely sober. "Perhaps some fresh air would help," she suggested gently. "Sophia, would you like to join me on the terrace for a moment?" Before either my father or Isabel could object, Linda had guided me away from them and through the French doors leading to the outdoor space overlooking the resort's gardens. Once outside, she led me to a secluded bench partially hidden by decorative topiaries. "Family dynamics can be incredibly painful," she said once we were seated. "Especially when there's such obvious disparity in how siblings are treated." I looked at her in surprise. "You noticed?" "It would be hard not to. I've been watching all weekend. Your father's speech was..." She shook her head, inappropriate, to say the least. Tears that I'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. "I'm sorry for causing a scene at your son's wedding." "You have nothing to apologize for," Linda said firmly. "And for what it's worth, Tyler has been concerned about how you've been treated as well. He mentioned it to me after your family dinner the other night." We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes as I collected myself. In the distance, I could hear the reception continuing, the DJ announcing the cake cutting would begin soon. "You don't have to go back in if you don't want to," Linda said. "Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is recognize when a situation is toxic and remove ourselves from it." Her understanding was the final permission I needed. "I think I'll call a car and go back to the house to get my things. My flight isn't until tomorrow, but I can see if there's an earlier option." Linda nodded. "That sounds like a good plan." "And Sophia? Whatever your father may think, from what I've seen, you're an impressive young woman who's building a good life for herself. That takes courage." I thanked her and slipped away from the reception without saying goodbye to my father or Isabel. As my rideshare pulled away from the resort, I felt not defeat but a strange sense of victory. For the first time I had spoken my truth out loud, refusing to accept the role assigned to me in the family story. The red-eye flight back to New York was uncomfortable, but I barely noticed the cramped seat or the crying baby 3 rows back. My mind was too full processing everything that had happened and what would come next. I'd managed to change my flight without too much of a fee, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and the wedding disaster. I hadn't heard from my father since walking out, though I'd received a scathing text from Isabel accusing me of trying to ruin her perfect day. I deleted it without responding. Maya was waiting at JFK when I landed at 6 a.m., bleary-eyed but determined to be there for my return. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Your place or mine?" she asked simply, taking my small suitcase. "Yours," I replied. Her apartment, which she shared with her girlfriend rather than student roommates, would be quieter and more private than mine. Once safely ensconced on Maya's couch with a cup of strong coffee, I recounted the entire weekend in exhaustive detail. She listened without interruption, her expression shifting between outrage, sympathy, and fierce pride. "You stood up to them," she said when I finished. "After all these years, you finally told your truth. That's huge, Sophia." "And now I'll probably have to drop out of school," I replied, the reality of my situation hitting me anew. "Dad will definitely cut me off after this." "We'll figure it out," Maya insisted. "You're too close to finishing to give up now." That evening, Maya and her girlfriend Zoe orchestrated what they called a real family dinner, inviting Josh from our apartment and 2 other close friends. They cooked my favorite pasta dish, opened wine, and toasted to chosen family who see and celebrate each other. It was exactly what I needed: warmth, acceptance, and genuine connection. The financial consequences arrived quickly. 3 days after my return to New York, I received an email from my father's assistant informing me that, due to changing financial priorities, the upcoming tuition payment would be my last. I had one more semester of support, and then I was on my own. I made an emergency appointment with the financial aid office, panic rising as I explained my situation to the counselor. She was sympathetic but realistic about the limited options mid-academic year. You can apply for additional loans, she advised, though that will significantly increase your debt burden. There are also some emergency scholarships for students in your situation, though they're highly competitive. I left with a stack of applications and a heavy heart, spending the next week applying for every possible scholarship, grant, and work-study position available. In the midst of this financial chaos, I received an unexpected email from Linda Wellington, Tyler's mother. "Sophia," she wrote, "I've been thinking about our conversation at the wedding and wanted to check in. Tyler mentioned your father's threat regarding your tuition. As someone who understands difficult family dynamics all too well, I'd like to offer my support." She explained that before becoming Tyler's mother, she had been a scholarship student herself, struggling to finance her education while dealing with a similarly unsupportive family. Now in a position to help others, she wanted to offer me assistance completing my degree. My first instinct was to refuse. Accepting money from my new brother-in-law's family felt too complicated, too potentially entangling. I didn't want to trade one financial dependency for another. I discussed the offer with Dr. Larson in our next therapy session. "What concerns you most about accepting her help?" she asked. "That it comes with strings attached," I admitted. "That I'd be obligated to maintain a relationship with Isabel and my dad." "Have you discussed those concerns with Linda directly?" I hadn't, so that evening I drafted a careful email explaining my gratitude but also my hesitation. Her response came quickly. "I understand your concerns completely. This offer comes with no expectations regarding your relationship with your father or sister. It would be structured as a formal loan with reasonable repayment terms beginning after you've established your career. I believe in investing in promising young people who have demonstrated resilience and determination. Our family foundation does this regularly. You wouldn't be receiving special treatment, just access to resources you should have had all along." After much consideration and several more exchanges clarifying the terms, I accepted Linda's offer as a loan, not a gift. The arrangement would allow me to complete my degree without the crushing debt I'd feared, while maintaining my independence and dignity. As the spring semester progressed, I threw myself into my studies and research with renewed focus. The confrontation at the wedding, painful as it was, had freed something inside me. I no longer carried the weight of seeking approval I would never receive. I had no contact with my father or Isabel, though I occasionally exchanged emails with Linda, who seemed genuinely interested in my academic progress. Through her, I learned that Tyler had been largely unaware of the family dynamics until the wedding weekend, and had been reconsidering certain aspects of his relationship in the aftermath. I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but I hoped he wouldn't suffer for marrying into my dysfunctional family. 6 months after the wedding, my life had found a new equilibrium. I was working additional hours at the coffee shop to cover my living expenses, but maintaining my grades and research position. The emergency scholarship applications had yielded some success. Not enough to cover tuition completely, but sufficient to reduce the loan from Linda to a manageable amount. I'd also started a small support group for students estranged from their families, creating the community I wished I'd had when first navigating the complicated emotions of family separation. We met weekly in a quiet corner of the student center, sharing resources, validation, and occasionally, homemade cookies. On a crisp October afternoon, almost exactly 6 months after the wedding debacle, a package arrived at my apartment. The return address was Linda Wellington's, but the handwriting wasn't hers. Inside was a small wooden box with a note. "Sophia, I found these while helping Tyler's parents move some things from their storage unit. Linda mentioned they might be meaningful to you. Wishing you well, Madeline Wellington. The box contained photographs I'd never seen before. My mother holding me as a baby, Mom and me gardening together, Mom at my elementary school science fair beaming with pride. Photos that had apparently been removed from the family albums after her death, preserved by someone who knew they mattered. Beneath the photos was a legal document and another note, this one in Linda's handwriting. In conversations with Madeline about your situation, she mentioned that your mother's name sounded familiar. After some investigation, we discovered why. Your mother, Elizabeth Mason, established a small trust for your education before her passing. It appears your father never informed you of its existence. As an attorney, I found this concerning and made inquiries with the trust administrator. The enclosed documents verify the trust and its current value. It's not an enormous sum, but it is rightfully yours. The administrator will be contacting you directly to arrange the transfer of funds. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by these recovered pieces of my history, overwhelmed by emotions. My mother, even as she was dying, had thought to provide for me, to ensure I would have options and independence. And somehow, my father had kept this from me, forcing me into financial dependence on him instead. The trust wouldn't make me wealthy, but combined with Linda's loan and my scholarships, it meant I could complete my education and perhaps even consider graduate school without crippling debt. More importantly, it was tangible proof that I had been loved unconditionally, that someone had seen my worth from the beginning. That evening, as I carefully placed the photos in frames around my small bedroom, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The painful wedding weekend had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough. By standing up for myself, I'd broken the pattern of compliance and silence that had defined my family role for so long. True family, I realized, wasn't defined by biology or legal ties, but by who shows up for you, who sees your authentic self and celebrates it. My chosen family, Maya, Josh, my support group, even unexpected allies like Linda and Madeline, had demonstrated more genuine care than my father ever had. As I hung the last photo, Mom and me at the aquarium, both smiling at the sea otters, I made a silent promise to her and to myself, I would build a life filled with authentic connections. I would become a therapist who helps others recognize their worth beyond family expectations. And someday, if I had children of my own, I would ensure that each one knew they were uniquely valued, never compared, always enough exactly as they are. The path forward wasn't easy or straightforward, but for the first time it was truly mine. If my story of family revenge against years of favoritism resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that were harming you? Or found unexpected support from someone outside your biological family? Your experiences might help others feeling trapped in similar situations. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength through difficult family dynamics and family revenge against toxic situations. Remember, sometimes the most courageous form of family revenge is simply choosing your own path and thriving despite others' attempts to dim your light. My journey shows that the best family revenge isn't about getting even, but getting free. Thank you for listening to my story of healing and ultimate family revenge through success and self-discovery.